A perfect summer afternoon in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. The air hums with the soft rustling of leaves, and the sun casts golden streaks across the pristine streets. Jordan Mitchell, a former police officer with 15 years on the force, is finally living his dream. After years of relentless overtime, sacrifices, and saving every penny, he owns his dream home, a stunning two-story masterpiece with a crystal-clear pool that shimmers under the Georgia sun. As he reclines in his lounge chair, eyes closed, soaking in the warmth of his hard-earned paradise, life feels perfect. But paradise has a price. And today, Jordan is about to pay it. A sudden, piercing sound shatters the tranquility. Police sirens. The wail grows louder, slicing through the calm like a blade. Then, screeching tires. Two patrol cars skid to a halt in front of his house. Officers step out, hands hovering near their holsters. Their eyes are locked onto Jordan. He pushes his sunglasses up and straightens, heart pounding. What could possibly be going on? He has spent his whole life on the right side of the law, yet something about the way they look at him, like he's a suspect, sends a chill down his spine. One officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut, steps forward. His name tag reads O'Connor. "Sir," he calls out, voice clipped with authority. "We received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in this pool area." Jordan exhales slowly, his pulse spiking. He doesn't need to look to know who made that call, but he does anyway. Through the corner of his eye, he catches a curtain twitching. A pair of eyes peer out, full of smug satisfaction. Susan Langley, his neighbor, his nightmare. The woman who has made it her mission to remind him, time and time again, that she doesn't think he belongs here. She has pushed him before. But this is the final straw. Let's rewind. Let's go back to where it all began, 2 months earlier. Jordan had never felt prouder than the day he moved into his new home. After a lifetime of protecting and serving, he had finally secured what generations before him had only dreamed of: homeownership in one of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhoods. The previous owners had kept the house in immaculate condition. And the backyard? The pool was the crown jewel, glistening like a promise. That's when he first saw her. Susan Langley, standing in her second-floor window, phone pressed to her ear, staring. Jordan, ever the gentleman, gave a polite wave. "Susan?" She vanished behind the curtain without a word. At first, he brushed it off. Not everyone is friendly right away. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she just wasn't the neighborly type. That was fine. He wasn't looking to make best friends, just to enjoy his home. The next morning, he was up early, sipping coffee on his back patio when he noticed something strange. His pool skimmer was missing. He looked around, puzzled. Had he left it somewhere else? No, he was sure he'd left it right by the pool deck. He scanned the yard in there, on the other side of the fence, propped up against Susan's patio furniture. A simple mistake. Maybe. People borrow things sometimes. But he hadn't even met Susan yet, let alone offered her access to his property. He decided to let it slide, this time. Later that afternoon, while Jordan was at the hardware store picking up supplies, his phone buzzed. A notification from his security camera app. He tapped it open and stared at the screen. There she was. Susan strolled through his unlocked back gate like she owned the place, a designer swimsuit hugging her frame, a luxury towel draped over one arm. She set up shop, laid her things on his pool chair, dipped her feet into his water, and sighed in contentment. Jordan's first reaction was disbelief. Was this real? Was she really helping herself to his backyard, as if it were some kind of community pool? He replayed the footage just to be sure. There was no mistaking it. His new neighbor had decided his home was her personal retreat. Taking a deep breath, Jordan headed home, determined to handle this diplomatically. Maybe she was just confused. Maybe the previous owners had let her use the pool, and she assumed she still had access. He'd have a calm, rational conversation, set boundaries, and that would be that. Or so he thought. When he arrived, Susan was still lounging poolside, sunglasses perched on her nose, flipping through a magazine. She didn't even flinch when he approached. "Excuse me," Jordan said, keeping his voice level. "Can I help you?" Susan looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, you must be the new owner." Jordan nodded. "That's right. And you are?" She removed her sunglasses, smiling as if they were old friends. "Susan Langley. I live next door." Jordan folded his arms. "Nice to meet you, Susan." But I have to ask, what are you doing in my backyard? Susan blinked, her expression a mix of confusion and amusement. Oh, don't be silly. The previous owners always let me use the pool. We had an arrangement. Jordan's jaw tightened. Well, I'm afraid that arrangement doesn't carry over. This is private property. Her smile faltered for a split second before returning, this time thinner, forced. Oh, come on now. It's just a pool. It's not like I'm hurting anything. Jordan exhaled sharply, keeping his frustration in check. That's not the point. You didn't ask. You just walked in. That's trespassing. Susan's eyes flickered with something sharp. Disbelief, irritation, maybe even defiance. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she said with a dismissive wave. We're neighbors. Neighbors share. Not like this, Jordan countered. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. For a moment, Susan just sat there, as if waiting for him to change his mind. When it became clear he wasn't backing down, she let out an exaggerated sigh, gathered her things, and stood. Well, she huffed. I didn't expect you to be so territorial. It's not very welcoming. Jordan didn't take the bait. I expect my property to be respected. Have a nice day. Susan lingered for a moment longer before turning on her heel and marching toward the gate. Just before disappearing through it, she threw one last glance over her shoulder. We'll see about that. It wasn't a comment. It was a warning. Jordan watched her go, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time he'd have to deal with Susan Langley. And he was right. When Jordan returned home from his errand, he was in high spirits. The day had been productive, and he was looking forward to an evening of relaxation by his pool. But as he pulled into his driveway, something felt off. A glance toward the backyard confirmed his suspicion. There was movement near the pool. His heart clenched with frustration as he stepped out of his car and moved swiftly toward the gate. Pushing it open, he was greeted by the sight of Susan Langley, lounging on one of his deck chairs, as if she owned the place. She wore a designer swimsuit, and a wide-brimmed hat shielded her face from the sun. A half-empty glass of what looked like white wine rested on the small table beside her. She dipped her feet in the pool, swirling the water absent-mindedly, her body language completely relaxed. Jordan took a deep breath, trying to keep his temper in check. Excuse me, but what are you doing in my backyard? Susan let out a small, exaggerated gasp and turned toward him, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. Oh, you startled me. I didn't hear you come in. Jordan folded his arms. I didn't expect to find someone trespassing in my backyard. Susan's lips curled into an amused smile. Oh, Jordan, isn't it? You're the new owner of this place. I was just enjoying the pool, as I always have. The previous owners were so kind. They never minded me coming over whenever I pleased. It was an unspoken arrangement. Jordan's jaw tightened. Well, I'm not them. And this is private property. Susan let out a soft laugh, as if he had just said something adorable. Oh, come now. You're new here. You'll learn that this community thrives on neighborly generosity. Jordan took a step closer, his voice firm but controlled. Generosity is one thing. Invading someone's property without permission is another. This is my home now, and I make the rules. If you wanted to use the pool, you should have asked. Susan's expression flickered for a brief moment. Disbelief flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by something sharper, more condescending. She adjusted her hat and crossed her legs. Oh, my dear, I just assumed, well, you know. Jordan raised an eyebrow. You assumed what? She waved a hand dismissively. That you were the new maintenance guy. It just seemed fitting. Jordan felt his blood boil, but years of training in law enforcement kept his emotions in check. He had dealt with people like Susan before, the kind who wore superiority like a second skin. No mistake, Susan, he said evenly. This is my house, and right now, you're trespassing. Susan's smile faltered. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a pool. It's not like I was stealing your furniture. Jordan clenched his jaw. That's not the point. The point is, you didn't ask, and you don't have permission. I need you to leave. Susan let out an exaggerated sigh and stood up, grabbing her towel. She moved leisurely, as if daring him to lose his temper. Fine, fine, if it means that much to you. But you really should be more neighborly. Jordan held the gate open for her. Have a good day, Susan. She paused in the doorway, turning back with a tight smile. Oh, don't worry. I will. We'll see how long this little arrangement lasts. With that, she strutted out, head held high, as if she were the one who had been wronged. Jordan closed the gate behind her and exhaled sharply. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time he'd have to deal with Susan Langley. And he was right, because later that night, the real games began. It started with something subtle, a sense of being watched. As Jordan sat in his living room, unwinding with a book, a prickling feeling crawled up his spine. He glanced toward the window, but the street was still. The neighborhood was quiet. Still, he couldn't shake the unease. Then, the noises started. At first, they were small. A rustling in the bushes outside his fence. A faint tapping against his windows. Each time he checked, there was nothing. But Jordan wasn't new to this game. He had worked enough cases to know when someone was testing boundaries. A few days later, his morning newspaper disappeared. He brushed it off as a coincidence, until it happened again the next day, and the next. Then came the HOA complaints. Jordan found the first one in his mailbox, an official-looking letter citing community concerns about his property. The complaints were ridiculous. Allegations of loud parties, which he never hosted, unkempt landscaping, his lawn was pristine, and unfamiliar guests, he hadn't had visitors since moving in. The signature at the bottom? Susan Langley. Jordan let out a humorless laugh. So, this was how she wanted to play it. Fine. He started documenting everything. Security cameras were installed at every angle of his home. He made sure to keep records of every interaction, every incident. If Susan wanted a battle, she was about to find out that he didn't back down easily. The breaking point came when he returned home, one evening, to find his gate slightly ajar. His stomach dropped. He had locked that gate before leaving. Stepping inside, his eyes scanned the area. Nothing seemed out of place, until he reached the pool. There, sitting brazenly on one of his deck chairs, was a towel. Not his. And next to it, a pair of sunglasses. Susan had been here. Again. His patience snapped. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in a while. Ramirez, came the familiar voice on the other end. Hey, it's Jordan. I need a favor. The next morning, Officer Ramirez, a longtime friend and former colleague, showed up at Susan's door. She answered with her usual polished smile, but when she saw the uniform, her expression tightened. Mrs. Langley, Ramirez said, tone polite but firm. We've received a report of trespassing on private property. Susan's eyes darted toward Jordan, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed. This is absurd. I was just. Ramirez held up a hand. Let me be clear. The owner of the property has made it known that you're not welcome there. If you enter again without his permission, we will have to press charges. Susan's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is a misunderstanding. Ramirez met her gaze evenly. Consider this your only warning. She clenched her jaw, but said nothing as Ramirez turned and walked away. As Jordan followed, he could feel Susan's glare burning into his back. He knew this wasn't over. But for now, at least, she knew he wasn't someone to be trifled with. And that was a start. What followed was a campaign of pure, calculated harassment. At first, it was subtle, minor inconveniences. Jordan would wake up to find his morning newspaper missing, though his neighbors still had theirs neatly stacked on their porches. Packages he ordered mysteriously never arrived, even though his security cameras showed the delivery driver dropping them off. A neighborhood watch email went out, vaguely warning residents to be vigilant about strange new residents in the area. He knew exactly who was behind it. Then, it escalated. It started with noise complaints. The first time the HOA contacted him, Jordan laughed. He lived alone, rarely had guests, and never played loud music. But according to the official report, his parties were disturbing the peace at all hours of the night. More complaints followed. His grass was too high. His trash bins were improperly stored. His car was parked suspiciously in his own driveway. The sheer absurdity of it all would have been amusing if it weren't so exhausting. One night, at around 2 a.m., Jordan's doorbell camera alerted him to motion. He groggily checked his phone and froze. Susan. She was standing in his yard, flashlight in hand, peering into his windows. Enough was enough. Jordan threw on a jacket and stormed outside. Susan. She gasped dramatically, clutching her chest. Oh my. You scare me. What the hell are you doing on my property? Jordan demanded. Susan put on her usual innocent act. I was just checking. I saw a light flickering inside and thought maybe something was wrong. Jordan clenched his jaw. Get off my property. She didn't move right away. Instead, she peered over his shoulder into the house, as if she had the right to inspect it. You live alone, right? She mused, tilting her head. He stepped forward, forcing her back a few steps. Last warning, Susan. She huffed, rolling her eyes before turning on her heel and walking away. Fine, but don't say I didn't try to help. After that, Jordan took precautions. He reinforced his fences, installed additional cameras, and even changed his locks. He wasn't afraid of Susan. He had faced worse threats in his years as a cop, but he knew people like her were unpredictable. She wasn't just trying to make his life miserable. She was trying to drive him out. And then she crossed the final line. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Jordan pulled into his driveway after running errands. He immediately noticed something was off. The side gate was open. His security system hadn't alerted him, meaning whoever had entered knew how to avoid the cameras. He approached cautiously, stepping through the gate, and stopped dead in his tracks. 8 women lounged by his pool, wine glasses in hand, designer sunglasses shielding their eyes from the sun. Susan was among them, sprawled across his lounge chair like she owned the place. A small speaker played soft jazz, and an empty bottle of expensive champagne sat on the poolside table. It was so surreal that for a moment, Jordan thought he was hallucinating. What the hell is going on here? He finally said, his voice carrying over the music. Susan turned her head lazily. Oh, you're back early. Jordan's fists clenched. This is my house. My pool. You broke into my yard. One of Susan's friends scoffed. Relax, it's just a pool party. Jordan was done playing games. Everyone out. Now. Susan sighed dramatically, setting down her drink. Jordan, be reasonable. We've always had access to this pool. The previous owners. I'm not the previous owners. His voice was dangerously low. I don't care what arrangement you had before. I live here now, and you are all trespassing. Susan rolled her eyes. You're being so difficult. Jordan pulled out his phone. Fine. I'll let the police handle this. That got their attention. The women scrambled to gather their belongings, hurriedly slipping into cover-ups and sandals. But Susan stayed seated, watching him with a smirk. Oh, please, she scoffed. You're really going to call the police? And tell them what? That a bunch of women were swimming in your pool. Jordan didn't answer. He simply dialed. A few minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up. Officer Ramirez, a man Jordan had known for years on the force, stepped out. He took one look at the situation and sighed. Let me guess. This is the misunderstanding you mentioned. Susan immediately turned on the waterworks. Oh, officers. I'm so glad you're here. This man, he's harassing us. We've always had pool privileges. We were just enjoying the afternoon, and he started yelling at us. Ramirez didn't even blink. Ma'am, he said flatly, Jordan Mitchell was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing. Susan's face twisted in frustration. This isn't over, she hissed as she gathered her things and stormed out. And she was right, because that night, Jordan discovered his pool had been sabotaged, filled with dish soap, transforming it into a foamy disaster. And that's when he decided to teach Susan Langley a lesson she would never forget. Jordan crossed his arms. You've been warned multiple times, Susan. I've been patient. I've tried to handle this civilly. But I'm done. Ramirez pulled out his notepad. Mr. Mitchell, do you want to press charges? Susan's head snapped toward Jordan, her eyes wide. You wouldn't dare. Jordan exhaled slowly. Not yet. But I want an official record of this incident. Susan's nostrils flared. This isn't over, she hissed, grabbing her designer towel and storming off. Her entourage followed suit, muttering under their breath. The last woman, out the gate, shot Jordan a look of pity before disappearing into the street. As soon as the trespassers were gone, Ramirez turned back to Jordan. You know this isn't the last time she'll try something, right? Jordan nodded. Oh, I know. But I have a plan. Ramirez smirked. Something tells me she's not going to like it. Jordan chuckled. Not one bit. That night, Jordan sat by his now empty pool, his mind racing. Susan had made it clear that she wasn't going to back down. She had too much pride, too much entitlement to simply accept defeat. If anything, this encounter had probably fueled her determination to find new ways to make his life miserable. And then, As he stared at the moonlit water, the idea came to him. A harmless, perfectly legal, but utterly humiliating plan. Susan Langley wanted to trespass in his pool. Fine, she could have it, but she wouldn't like the results. With a small, satisfied smile, Jordan pulled out his phone and started researching. The next time Susan decided to break the rules, she was going to leave with something more than just another empty threat. She was going to leave with a lesson she'd never forget. Jordan had always believed in justice. After years on the force, he had seen the best and worst of people. But what Susan Langley had been doing to him wasn't just annoying. It was calculated harassment, a deliberate attempt to push him out of the neighborhood. And now, after all the false police reports, the Facebook smear campaigns, and the constant trespassing, she had gone too far. The dish soap incident had been the last straw. Seeing his once pristine pool turn into a bubbling, foamy mess made his blood boil. It wasn't just a prank, it was a message. A message that she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. But Jordan wasn't one to back down. If Susan wanted to play games, she was about to find out that she'd picked the wrong opponent. That night, as he scrubbed out the last remnants of soap from his pool, an idea formed. A plan. A way to teach Susan Langley a lesson she would never forget, without breaking a single law. The next morning, Jordan made a trip to his old buddy's pool supply store. "You need another round of chlorine?" his friend, Marcus, asked as he stacked bags of pool chemicals. "Not this time," Jordan replied with a smirk. "I need something special." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Special how?" Jordan leaned in and lowered his voice. "You remember that prank dye we used in the academy? The one that turned skin green when mixed with certain chemicals?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, I haven't thought about that in years. But yeah, I've got some. It's completely harmless, just embarrassing as hell." "Perfect." Jordan grinned. "I'll take it." Marcus handed over the small vial. "You mix this into the water, and it stays invisible. But the moment it comes into contact with sunscreen or certain lotions, bam, whoever's in there turns bright green. It takes about a week to fully wear off." Jordan nodded. "That's exactly what I need." That evening, he carefully mixed the dye into his pool water, making sure the solution was completely undetectable. Then, he set the bait. On the neighborhood social board, he posted a message. "Heading out of town this weekend. Pool maintenance will be on hold for a few days. Hope the weather stays nice." He knew Susan watched that forum like a hawk. He also knew that she couldn't resist an opportunity. If she thought his house was unguarded, she and her entourage would be in that pool faster than he could say trespassing. And right on schedule, Saturday afternoon rolled around, and his security cameras caught the action. Susan Langley and her group of equally entitled friends strutted through the side gate like they owned the place. Dressed in expensive swimsuits, designer sunglasses perched on their noses, they waltzed to the poolside with champagne in hand. Susan, as usual, led the charge. "Ah, ladies," she sighed, reclining on one of Jordan's lounge chairs. "See? I told you. You wouldn't do anything. Once a pool is shared, it's impossible to take that privilege back." Her friends giggled, clinking their glasses. "Honestly, I don't know why he even bothers trying to keep us out," one of them said. "He should be grateful we're using it." Jordan, watching from a hidden vantage point in his house, chuckled to himself. "Oh, you'll be grateful all right." One by one, they slathered on their sunscreen, chatting about their weekend plans, oblivious to what was about to happen. Then, with exaggerated grace, Susan slid into the water. The effect wasn't immediate. It took about 5 minutes for the transformation to begin. At first, Susan frowned, looking at her arms. "Does the water look weird to you?" she asked. One of her friends, already floating on a pool raft, glanced down. "No. Why?" Susan rubbed her arm. "I don't know. My skin feels strange." Then, another woman gasped. "Oh my God, Susan. Your hands." Susan lifted her hands out of the water and screamed. They were bright, unmistakable green. "What the hell?" she shrieked, scrambling to get out of the pool. The other women stared in horror as green patches bloomed across their arms, legs, and faces. One by one, realization dawned on them. "I'm green," one woman wailed, clutching her face. "What is happening?" Another screeched, running to the pool's edge. Susan staggered to the lounge chairs, frantically rubbing at her skin. "It won't come off. It won't come off." Chaos erupted. Women scrambled out of the pool, knocking over their drinks, shrieking in horror as the green stain deepened. Some tried to rinse off in the outdoor shower, only for the color to spread further. Others grabbed their phones, their panicked reflections staring back at them in the camera. Jordan decided it was time for the final touch. He activated the pool's built-in speakers and, with a grin, played a pre-recorded message. "Attention trespassers, you have been marked. This is a harmless but very long-lasting dye that reacts with high-end sunscreens. Enjoy a new look for the next 7 days. And don't forget, security cameras are recording." The screaming intensified. Phones clattered to the ground as the women made a run for it, covering their faces, shrieking with embarrassment. Susan, shaking with rage, locked eyes with the security camera. "You did this," she bellowed. Jordan, still hidden inside, laughed so hard he had to clutch his stomach. Within minutes, they were gone, running down the street, dripping wet, with neon green skin that would take a week to fade. And Jordan? He uploaded the security footage online with a simple caption: "Trespassers get what they deserve." The video went viral. Headlines popped up: "Neighborhood Karen gets green with envy," and "Entitled pool crashers learn hard lesson." The community, tired of Susan's antics, relished every second. The HOA couldn't ignore it anymore, and within days, a for sale sign appeared in Susan's yard. Justice had been served. As Jordan sat back with a glass of lemonade, watching the moving trucks pull away, he smiled. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't violent. It's just a perfectly legal, utterly humiliating, and completely unforgettable lesson in karma. And a little pool dye. The fallout from Susan Langley's last trespassing stunt was swift and relentless. The video of her and her entourage running out of Jordan's pool, their skin turned an undeniable shade of green, spread across social media like wildfire. It wasn't just a neighborhood scandal. It became a full-blown internet sensation. News outlets picked up the story, YouTubers made reaction videos, and memes flooded every platform. But for Jordan, it was more than just a viral moment. It was vindication. As he sat in his backyard, sipping his morning coffee, he scrolled through the countless comments under the video. Imagine thinking you own someone else's pool and getting karma served cold. Green isn't just for envy anymore. Susan really thought she was the main character. He chuckled to himself. The entire ordeal had been exhausting, but finally, Susan was facing the consequences of her relentless harassment. Within days, Susan became the subject of local gossip. Her once perfect reputation among the elite of the neighborhood crumbled. The homeowners association, tired of the negative attention, distanced itself from her. A formal complaint was filed against her for repeated violations of neighborhood regulations, and her standing with the HOA plummeted. The real estate company Susan worked for wasn't thrilled with the publicity either. Jordan had barely mentioned her full name in the video, but the internet did its thing. People figured out who she was, and soon, clients began canceling appointments with her. She tried to push back. She attempted to spin the situation, claiming she had been the victim of a cruel prank. But no one bought it. The security footage didn't lie, and neither did the countless witnesses who had seen her and her friends lounging in Jordan's backyard like they owned the place. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Jordan watched from his porch as moving trucks rolled up, carrying out boxes and furniture. Susan's pristine image had been shattered, and now she was making a hasty retreat. She had spent years treating Jordan like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. But in the end, she was the one forced to leave. With Susan gone, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. The tension that had clouded Jordan's every interaction with her was gone. He no longer had to deal with sideways glances or veiled comments. For the first time since moving in, he felt like he could truly enjoy his home. And he did. The pool, once a battleground, became a place of peace again. His friends came over more often, enjoying barbecues and lazy afternoons by the water. Jordan even hosted a small celebration, inviting neighbors who had supported him through the ordeal. The gathering was a symbol of new beginnings, a fresh start free from unnecessary conflict. One by one, people came up to him that evening, shaking his hand, apologizing for not stepping in sooner, for not standing up to Susan. "I should have spoken up," said Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from 3 houses down. "She made it seem like you were the problem, but I see now she was just, well, a bully." Jordan smiled. Better late than never. Despite everything, Jordan didn't hold a grudge. He had spent too many years on the force dealing with people who thrived on resentment and anger. He knew it was a poison that only hurt the person holding on to it. Instead, he took satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served, not through malice or revenge, but through the simple act of standing his ground and exposing the truth. His story became something of a cautionary tale in the community. It was a lesson that privilege and entitlement didn't exempt anyone from consequences. And it was a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with a problem wasn't through confrontation or aggression, but through patience, cleverness, and a little bit of creativity. Months passed, and life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Jordan took up new hobbies, explored more of the city, and even started dating again. With Susan gone, it felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. And as for the internet, the video of Susan's poolside humiliation still made the rounds now and then, resurfacing every few months as a reminder of what happens when entitlement meets poetic justice. One afternoon, Jordan received a message from an old colleague in law enforcement. It was a link to a news article. Susan Langley fired from real estate firm. Scandal continues to haunt her. He shook his head with a small smile. Actions had consequences, and sometimes karma worked in ways no one could predict. As the sun set over his backyard, casting golden hues across the water, Jordan took one last glance at his phone before setting it aside. He leaned back in his chair, watching the sky darken, feeling, finally, at peace. His home was truly his now, and no one could take that away from him again. If you've ever dealt with a Susan in your life, someone who thought they were untouchable, who believed they could manipulate and bully their way through everything, just know this. Sometimes, all it takes is patience, persistence, and a little well-timed exposure to bring the truth to light. And when karma finally catches up, well, let's just say it's worth the wait. Drop a comment below if you got a story like this. And don't forget to hit that like button, because some stories deserve to be told.